Hi, in this demo we're going to take a look at training and deploying a standalone large language model and putting some guardrails on top of it. First we'll look at DataStudio for data prep. We'll look at LLM Studio for model fine-tuning. We'll take a look at MLOps to deploy the large language model, and we'll apply guardrails on top of all of that. Okay, so let's take a look at the product itself. Here we have the H2O AI Cloud and Enterprise HOGPT is a component here. We can see that in the App Store, we've got a few studios, like I just mentioned, we'll take a look at. But this is really where you can have any sort of use case application for stakeholders of the model you're building, that sort of thing. So it's all hosted on top of Kubernetes. Each one of these instances controls authentication and enables auto-scaling for multiple users to all be using pretty much the same model if you want, or multiple models as deployed in MLOps. All right, let's take a quick look at LLM's Data Studio. So as an example of one application, you can see I've got one running instance. My colleagues have a few. You know, I'm a user here, and I can see that if I click on Visit, I'm going to get sent over to my running instance of LLM Data Studio, which is right here. So Data Studio, like I mentioned, is a no-code UI for effectively preparing your data, both for fine-tuning as well as for downstream applications. So if I click on Curate, you're going to see a few example projects here. Just for today's demo, we're going to take a look at creating a new project. And so you can upload various different document types, PDFs, documents, MP3 files even. And so typically what we want to do, though, is create QA pairs based on our documents so that we can subsequently fine-tune on top of that. So we've got QA pairs and summarization and file summary. So summarization, maybe we're given an article and we want to create a summary from that article. File summary is an entire file. Maybe we want to create a model that can summarize an entire file, right? But more often than not, we're trying to create QA pairs. So let's leave that as that. Now I've got an existing annual report from a large financial institution. Maybe we can use as an example here. So I upload that file. I'll take a few seconds. There we go. Now the first thing you can do is decide whether or not you want to do smart chunking. So for documents that are really massive, hundreds or thousands of pages, we can perform smart chunking, which effectively goes out there and first finds the most important parts of the document to subsequently create those QA pairs based off of, right? So if you leave the sampling ratio to 0, the best ratio is chosen automatically. So we're going to run that pipeline. This is going to run for a while. It might pop up a few times during the demo, right? So that's going to keep going. Let's take a look at a completed one. So in this case, I believe I have at least one completed one. Yep. So we ended up with 1,177 QA pairs. It's a 166-page document, not the biggest, not the smallest in the world. And so when it's done, it looks like this. So all we did was upload a PDF, and it's a pretty complex PDF. It's an annual report, so it's got images and text and tables, and it could really look like anything that the annual report can look like. So we've created instruction and response QA pairs just based off that, no necessary input. We've sorted them by relevancy, right, in this case. And so you can take a few actions here in this view. First of all, you can label each individual QA pair or groups of QA pairs as either irrelevant or relevant. You can edit them directly, right? But ultimately, you probably want to output them typically as a CSV, but we can do it as JSON or even output it to H2O drive, so shared storage across the platform. So I've already done that, and we'll take a look at taking this and fine-tuning on it a little bit further. But let's take a look at another possible way to use Data Studio, and that's with prepared pipelines. So in this case, we support a wide range of tasks. Just for an example, we've got question answering, text summarization, struct tuning, open assistant, kind of human bot conversation, chatbot, and continued pre-training, right? So for example, maybe we look at the text summarization pipeline here. Now you can take this pipeline and add your own data to it. We're going to use the demo data set today. We definitely want to make sure that we've identified the article column and the summary column, so we want to go ahead and do that. And so now we can see the drag and drop type of UI approach where we can build our repeatable pipeline for doing data preparation. So in this case, let me go back to, here we go, workflow. So in this case, we're taking our data, we're potentially cleaning it, we're removing profanity, identifying and removing profanity, checking it for quality. So I think we use the flush grade to check the reading level, for example. We can check the length. Very typical, but also potentially painful data prep steps for making sure that you're fine-tuning on the highest quality data, most curated data set. So, compression, maybe we want to end token, make sure that there's an end token for our summaries in this case. So we'll go ahead and click on review so we can check out the configurations we ultimately picked. Now the output, here's an example where we started off with 1,000 QA pairs. We ended up with 125, and we can see at each step of our pipeline where we lost. So we lost quite a large number of our data going from the quality step to the length step. Now we can see the resulting, in some example, rows of the final data set. Here's a full article, and here's the summary that we created automatically. So in this case, we can clearly see we added the start and end words to the beginning and end of the summary, which will further get tokenized later. You can also check out the intermediate features. So in this case, like I said, we can detect profanity and come up with a quantitative measure of that. I mentioned the flesh grade already for reading quality, article length, summary length, compression ratio, that sort of thing. All the intermediate steps that were created to ultimately create this pipeline. So again, we can download the CSV or export that to shared storage. You can also, last but not least, check out the insights. So in this case, we started off with 1,000, we ended up with 125. Well, what actually happened there, you can view the dropped rows, and not only that, the reason for each dropped row. So this already gets back to the AI governance kind of perspective here of tracking what data actually gets used for fine-tuning. So now that we've kind of taken a really quick look at Data Studio, let's take a look at LLM Studio. So LLM Studio is another part of Enterprise HO-GPT. You can see I'm running this on a single NVIDIA A100, 80 gigabytes of RAM. Typically something like this is required if you're going to be fine-tuning on larger models. If we look at the settings briefly, these are global settings. And I wanted to look at these because it's important to realize we can configure it to talk to AWS, Azure Data Lake, Kaggle. If you're a competitive data scientist, you can directly add your username and secret key. You can also add additional experiment tracking, which we'll look at in a second. For example, Neptune is one example. Hugging Face, so if you want to, when you're done model training, push it directly at Hugging Face, you can do that. We can leverage existing Gen AI technologies like OpenAI. We can talk to GPT while the model's fine-tuning, so we can score and measure how the model's performing. So you see that's going on here. We can even, for what it's worth, we can also support on-premise deployments of Gen AI technology. So if you've got Azure, OpenAI running on-premise, this can connect to that too. So these are some global settings. Let's take a look at some data. So it comes preloaded with two data sets. One is an example of causal language modeling with the Open Assistant data set, and then we also have one for direct preference optimization. Right here we see that annual report, the QA pairs we generated from Data Studio 1177. That's a good one. Another one we might want to look at is a data set that we've put together. These are LinkedIn posts, and they're LinkedIn posts from a set of quote-unquote LinkedIn influencers, right? So the use case here might be maybe we want to fine-tune a model such that we provide it a title, and it generates a LinkedIn post, but it is specifically generating a LinkedIn post based on LinkedIn influencer style, right? So maybe we'll get more attention if we post in a particular way, right? Just as a motivational example. So we can take a look at the rows, but also a few visualizations, just understanding the training data itself. So how long are the prompts? How long are the answers? These are some distributions where we can look at that and, of course, put them together, total length, distribution, what does that look like, and some other summary stats. But once you've got your data sitting here, it's really easy to create a model and create an experiment. Just click on Create Experiment. Now at this point, you could just click Run Experiment, and you're going to get a fine-tuned model. But just to walk through some of the settings here, there are quite a large number of expert settings here. Like I said, you don't have to really tweak anything. You could just click Run Experiment. But one of the most important settings for an experiment is the backbone. And this is effectively the foundational model you're going to be using to do fine-tuning off of. So obviously we've got a few models here that are preloaded into this dropdown. You can copy paste the model location from Hugging Face. So really any open source model that's on Hugging Face, you can copy paste there and begin fine tuning off of that. Now, we certainly don't have enough time to go through all these settings. I'll scroll through here and I'll talk about some of the key ones. So for data set, you can you can pick your sampling strategy, validation strategy. You can add end of sequence tokens, either the prompt or the answer automatically. You can kind of control some of the tokenizer settings. So max length of the prompt, max length of the answer, total max length put together. Quantization we support. Let me scroll through here. Loss function, you can pick your optimizer, learning rate schedule. We support flash attention. Lots of stuff in here. Obviously, one of the key kind of categories of settings would be LoRa, right? So out of the box, you can do low rank adaptation here, hopefully minimizing the GPU and memory footprint of your fine-tuned model you're going to end up with, right? So all sorts of best practices from our Kaggle Grandmasters that have really used this tool to achieve first place on quite a large number of the Kaggle competitions related to LLMs. This is also what I was describing as you can use a very powerful model like GPT-4 as the judge to do your fine-tuning. You can also use more simple and quote-unquote cheap, at least from a computation perspective, metrics like BLEU and perplexity score, right? And that is configurable. So that's pretty much it. Of course, there are a large number of settings I am skipping just in the sake of time. Now, I will click launch, but also you see here that I've configured Neptune, just as an example. Like I said, we like existing in popular ecosystems. We've seen a lot of experiment tracking tools out there, one of which is Neptune. So, as this goes, I've already configured LLM Studio to talk to Neptune. So, just as an example, let me just refresh the page here, see if that experiment just got kicked off. And so if we look at one of these, you're going to see, there it is. That's the one that just got kicked off. But you can see here now you're able to go through here and get even more tracking and model monitoring and really just be able to understand what's going on with each one of these fine-tuned models you create. So in this case, we might be looking at how the learning rate changed over time, the train batch loss, right? And we can kind of aggregate this within Neptune if you'd like, and of course one validation metric. You can also take a look at configurations, right? So these are completely configurable, but very important for experiment tracking to really understand what settings were used, right? So if you're creating thousands and thousands of models, you really need to understand like what changed from one model to the other. Now that's just one example of using an external experiment tracking tool, but of course we support, within the tool our own version of that. So a completed experiment kind of looks like this. Again, you've got the train batch loss, the learning rate, the validation metrics. If we click on validation prediction insights, this is where we see, the truth, what was the input, the truth, what was the target, and then ultimately what the model predicted for fine tuning. And whatever metric you pick, it's also going to give you the score for that row. In this case, it's the BLEU score, right, with how well the model did. Now, maybe one more thing. On the trained data insights, you can see exactly what data was used for fine-tuning. So again, we see our prompt with a special token prompt. It's ending with answer, so the very next thing that the model sees is the answer. And all that put together in a tokenized context kind of looks like this, right, where we can clearly see the result of applying whatever the foundational model's tokenizer was. So it really just gives you a transparent view on what the model actually saw. So you can download the logs, you can download the predictions, you can download the model weights itself. So at this point, you could download the model and deploy it anywhere you really need to. You can also push directly to something like Hugging Face, right? So it kind of is like a model hub. We also do support local on-premise versions of a model hub where you can kind of deploy this fine-tuned model there to be deployed other ways. So that's a really quick view of LLM Studio. And now we're going to look really quick at deploying a model, and we will look at the UI in just a second. I want to flip over to some code. A lot of the stuff I'm showing you with the UI can also be done via code, via orchestration tools. So in this case, I'm going to show you just a few example Python functions and APIs to deploy a fine-tuned LLM, right? So again, kind of sticking with the motivational use case here. Maybe we deployed to Hugging Face, and now we want to deploy it as a REST endpoint, right? So in this case, we're scrolling through here. We might want to package up the model, right? based on what type of model it is. In this case, we're probably going to be using a framework like MLflow, an open source tool to package up the model itself. Ultimately, it looks like something like this, right? So we're pointing to our Hugging Face, and we're actually pointing to a model that we fine-tuned and want to deploy. So now that we've got that model path, we can deploy it to H2O MLOps. In this case, we're choosing an LLM runtime. We have some GPU settings. We've got Python APIs for virtually everything you can think of from a machine learning engineering perspective in the AI cloud. MLOps, of course, having its own. And nothing crazy here. We're just authenticating, right? So just showing you ways that you can very specifically configure your pipelines, whether it be deployment pipelines, governance pipelines. It's a really advanced and customizable way to do all that. So I'm certainly not trying to show too much code here, just as an example of how you can go out there. And yeah, I mean, if you just look at this, it's very configurable and customizable each step of the way, what happens when you deploy the experiment, model, and deployment. Now, at the end of the day, you end up with something like this, where you want to go and create an LLM deployment. We'll call it the Influencer 2 deployment, right? And so you're able to go out there and configure the model. In this case, we might want to then, once it's deployed, retrieve the model, maybe in this notebook, maybe in an application we've built, some downstream application, and we can test it, right? So let's go out there and ask it a question. It works. As we can see, it returns what we'd expect, deployed as that REST endpoint, and then you can even do, as an example of some streaming chat completions where you're asking multiple questions at the same time. So that's just a very quick view of the the API. But the UI has a lot of the same information. So if we click on, let me go ahead and refresh that. If we click on, let me go back to the beginning, click on My Models, actually. This is where MLOps is directly accessible. There we go. So I've got two projects here. If we focus on the LLMs, one, this is a project where it's got a few different deployments, models, and experiments. So if I click on first settings, one thing that's interesting is you can add tags to this project, right? So if the whole project is a development project or a production project, you can say production, right? Add that tag, and it's going to be associated with that project. So now if we click on experiments, we're going to see that we have two experiments in here. Again, this is that Influencer Demo 2 we created with the API. And if I take a look here, you can edit the experiments itself. You can add tags here. Here's that tag we just created from before. So maybe this is a production experiment, and we want to make sure that that gets tagged for production or dev, right? Let's take a quick look at what that experiment looks like. Again, we see MLflow. This is a special LLM runtime, but there's all sorts of metadata that come along for the ride. You can also edit and configure what gets pushed to the experiment in terms of metadata. Typically, the next step is we want to create a model registry. So experiments are the lowest level of granularity, but models can be deployed. So we've got the same experiment. We've got two different versions of that experiment just to show off, you can increment the version when a new model comes along. But ultimately, you want to create a deployment. So if we click on deployments, I've got one running, but one way to create a deployment, let's go in here and say test deployment, right? And so we can pick either a single model, A/B test, champion, challenger. In the case of an LLM, it's usually just a single model, right? You can pick the dev or prod environment. Again, this might be a prod application. For LLMs, the artifact type and runtime are static, right? So it's a GPU-enabled VLM runtime that we've created. And some advanced settings, just to point out, you can configure the endpoint path. So if you do need to have like a static endpoint where the model is always accessible at, you can select that. You can add some security settings here. And really on the auto-scaling side, all of this is using Kubernetes under the hood. So you can configure how many replicas are supported for this model. You can add, these are default Kubernetes settings, but you can always add more. Right, so if you want to really customize the Kubernetes side of the house, you can do that as well. So I'm going to click cancel and we'll just take a look at an existing deployment. Once it's deployed, it kind of looks like this. And, there it is. There's the REST endpoint that our large language model exists at. We fine-tuned a model and deployed it there. You can see an example of what that curl request might look like. It just needs to be text input. So this is just an example of some prompt that you would send it just to test. Right, and at the end of the day, you can see what the security details are if you're an admin, and some information about the Kubernetes settings itself. All right, so that's quite a lot about MLOps. Now, really quickly, you might also want to deploy guardrails on top of that. So flipping back to a little bit of code. Now, let's say we've deployed our model as an API, or as a REST API. So here's another example. We've got our security credentials, and now we effectively want to apply guardrails on top of that. Maybe this is the case of an application we're building, right? In this notebook, we'll just see some examples, but we're also, in this case, using open source guardrails. We do have some guardrails as part of our enterprise HOGPT, but in this case, we also wanted to highlight that you can integrate this with existing GenAI tools and whatever ecosystem you find that you need to. We've built out some specific guardrails to check for LinkedIn influencers, so let's take a look. In this case, with guardrails, if we ask the question, tell me what you can do. Again, this has guardrails on it. It says, great, I'm here to help you with creating LinkedIn posts based on LinkedIn influencers, right? So we fine-tune that model, and then we've put guardrails on top of it to make sure that it performs the way that we want it to. That same sort of question, in fact, that exact same question, without the guardrails, comes back with a very different response. Hello, as a helpful and honest assistant, I'm here to assist you, et cetera, et cetera. It doesn't mention anything about LinkedIn influencers. Now, taking this a step further, what about writing a LinkedIn post like Bill Gates? With the guardrails on, you start to see it's speaking in the language that one might expect from Bill Gates, as I reflect on my career and the incredible advancements we've made in tech. But without it, it just simply gives a title, the power of innovation, collaboration. Hello, LinkedIn community, as I reflect on the past year. So it's close, but not exactly what we wanted to. Same deal, just another simple example is Elon Musk. With the guardrails on, it's mentioning that it's a LinkedIn post in style of Elon Musk. Here's an example. Without them, it does not have that. And then ultimately, here's a kind of funny example, writing a LinkedIn post like Daffy Duck. With the guardrails on, it maintains its professionalism, right? Just like a LinkedIn influencer would, you might expect, right? So it doesn't do anything crazy. But if you don't have those guardrails on, using this exact same model, it's giving you some funny stuff, right? So Daffy Duck voice, oh boy. LinkedIn, you say, haha, well, gosh darn it, right? So not very professional, probably not what you actually want coming out of your model. So that's a really quick example of building and deploying an entire model, then putting guardrails on top of it.